Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa Dickens, host of the Propcast and co-founder of LMRE, the global PropTech recruitment and search consultancy. In this podcast, we'll explore how the digital evolution of the real estate industry is impacting the property market. The aim of each episode is to introduce you to a PropTech innovator and discuss how their work has created a shift in focus when it comes down to digitizing the built environment. If you're interested in finding out more about PropTech or applying for a job in this space, or keen to know who the big players are that are moving and shaking the real estate industry up, we have you covered, and we will be bringing you an episode each week to connect to the VCs, PropTech startups, and real estate professionals from around the globe. Also, a big shout out to our sponsors of the podcast, ReamTech and Cretech, who you will hear from during the episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. Today, we'll be discussing the changing consumer trends in renting towards simplicity, convenience, and excellent customer service. When it comes to the management of rental properties, shifting expectations have resulted in residents expecting the highest levels of customer service, including immediate action and fixes for issues. Our guests on today's podcast, Helen Kings, the Managing Director of Touchstone, and Tom Allason, founder of Residently, will discuss how Touchstone are keeping pace through the intelligent application Residently's tech and service marketplace. So welcome to the show, Helen and Tom. Thanks, Louisa. It's great to be here.
Likewise.
But first of all, a very brief introduction to our guests. So Helen, who's joining us, has extensive experience in retail, FM and housing, and leads Touchstone, the award-winning residential property management company, which is part of Places for People Group. Touchstone now manages over something like 16,000 homes in the PRS sector across every single postcode in the UK. Helen also sits on the residential property board at the British Property Federation and non-executive director at Cirencester Housing, and was named as a leading light for kindness in leadership in 2019. Tom, who is joining us from Bermuda, which I just found out, is a serial marketplace entrepreneur and is known for founding Shuttle, which was acquired by eBay, and eCourier, acquired by the Royal Mail. Prior to founding Residently, Tom spent 4 years as an executive at eBay, during which he rented 5 homes in 3 countries, each time repeating the same stressful and time-consuming process. Tom's current venture, Residently, wants to be the #1 home brand and aims to give power and control to renters. They'll do this by simplifying the rental process, from finding the perfect pad to furnishing it and finding an expert home services at the tap of a button. And yeah, again, thank you both for joining me. And I think we are ready to get started with the questions. And Tom, why don't you start us off with telling our listeners, what's the story behind Residently? How does it help the tenant as well as the landlord?
Sure. Delighted to, Louisa. So I guess for me, it started, I had a renovation on my home in London. And as a result of that, I needed a place to live. I hadn't rented a property in London in a decade, but I was at a nicer end of the market than I'd been at previously, and it had been 10 years. So I thought this would be not necessarily a fun process, but I thought it'd be relatively easy. And the short version of the story is that it wasn't. And at the end, I did find a place. It was incredibly stressful. But then even living in a property, in a rented property, after you've lived in properties that you've owned, it takes a little getting used to. And anyway, I thought this was something that someone should do something about. But as a smug property owner, I didn't think that someone should be me, someone else's problem. And then I ended up getting relocated for work, first to San Francisco, then to San Jose, and then to Seattle. And each time I repeated this exact same process. And I guess I'm a little bit of a slow learner, but along the way, I had that realization that what most of the world are going to spend the most on for the rest of their lives has an inconsistent customer experience and enjoys no brand loyalty. And so the idea was pretty simple. It was, what if you can create an experience for the renter that removes all friction from the process of renting and elevates the experience of renting? And if you can do that, you can earn loyalty with the renter. And in doing so, build a brand in that segment of the customer's wallet. And so that was what we set out to do.
And when did you start Residently? How many years ago?
I had initially funded and incubated the very earliest sort of proof of concept while I was still at eBay, which was in 2017. 2018, I left eBay to go full time on this. And yeah, we started off in London, then we launched a pilot in New York. We've we're now national across the UK.
Awesome. That's not bad for a few years' work. Congratulations. Now, Helen, how do you know Tom? We've so briefly were working out how we all knew each other on this podcast, but how did the partnership come about between Residently and Touchstone?
When I joined Touchstone, which was about 4 years ago now, one of the things that was really clear to me was that it was a really solid company. It had a really safe pair of hands. I know we're really good at property management and we have all of the kind of foundations and systems and processes that we needed to do that. And we had a good resident portal. We had some online maintenance reporting, but we didn't have that really forward-thinking, customer-focused, intuitive tech that we could put on top of it. And I knew really from day one that if we could combine that with the really solid business that we already had, we'd have a winning combination. So really early on, we started to look at all the tech on the market, and you'll know there's lots of prop tech ideas out there. And 4 years ago, there was a lot that was ready to go. There was a lot that was still being developed, but there was nothing I could find that really put the customer at the heart of the journey and that really importantly integrated seamlessly with our existing systems. So we did a lot of work internally. We drew up some digital roadmaps in terms of everything that we wanted to achieve. And then we looked at Residently, and it was sort of a little bit of an epiphany that everything that was on our digital roadmap was either already there in Residently or there was a plan to build it. You know, it looks good, it's intuitive, it's contemporary, it's something that I would enjoy using as a customer. And most importantly, it's customer focused rather than property focused. We had a really good existing system that helps us manage property, but to really deliver that resident experience, we needed something different. And that's what Residently brought to us and why we wanted to form a partnership.
I've spoken with this with a couple of clients as well. How was the whole, I guess, integration? Was there any obstacles in the way of this sort of partnership? Obviously, you work across a lot of your property management system, but how was the whole integration process at the beginning?
It's still a journey in progress. I think we'll talk later about integration, but that's critical. So, Tom and I had a very honest conversation right at the beginning where we talked about anything that involved double keying or a lack of efficiency wasn't going to work. So it was really important that the back end of Residently was important as the front end. So that's been something that we've worked through a lot together and we continue to work with. But I think it's pulling together really well. Anyone that runs a property business knows that there's lots of different sexy, exciting prop tech things on the market. And actually, for me, what's most important is finding a team that you can work with and that you have a relationship with so you can continue to work together to finesse that product. And I think that's what we found in our partnership.
And I guess in terms of, Tom, maybe this is one for you or maybe for you as well, Helen, you know, there's been plenty of changes in regulations in the rental market over the past few years. One being, you know, the tenant fee ban. How does that affect your business and product? And then probably ties in quite nicely to what Helen just said about being able to change and adapt your product to meet the client's new needs.
It's interesting. So in the tenant fee ban itself was probably quite helpful for us because we as a business we don't have any fees for our landlord or property management partners, and we don't have any fees to the renter. The way that we monetize is we take a commission of home services that we enable on our platform that are provided to the renter at point of need throughout the life cycle. And we think of the life cycle as the period where you're trying to find a property, the period where you found a property and you're trying to secure that property, the period where you're living in that property, and then what happens when you move out. And so by being able to monetize those things in a virtuous manner, as in the services don't cost any more to the renter and it's a better experience than going direct to a partner, we've been able to monetize without having to charge the landlord or our property management partner, which at a time when obviously agents are getting squeezed slightly and they're having to pass on their fees, you know, obviously something we're not going to be able to do. The other thing I think worth for us, you know, we shifted our business model quite a bit from when we first started. And the approach that we took was to do everything ourselves so that we could understand the whole end-to-end experience. And that at the time included doing property management. We felt we needed to be able to control every part of what was driving that experience to the end renter. And when Helen and I started chatting, it was very clear that we had an alignment in how we viewed the renter as customer. And it meant that, you know, I'm a firm believer that businesses can only really be very good at one thing. And for us, to spend all our time, to spend a meaningful amount of time and product and engineering resource developing solutions for property management, when you've got someone who's an expert who's been doing nothing but this as a company for decades. Just law of comparative advantage. It makes sense to divide and conquer. And so we actually changed our model. I'm very glad that we started off doing those things because it meant that we had a reasonable understanding of some complexity, but it also meant that it made it a bit easier for us to understand and appreciate the value that a partner like Touchstone and their expertise can bring.
Here is a message from our sponsor, Michael Beckerman from Cretech.
Hey, this is Michael Beckerman from Cretech. I'm here to invite you to check out Cretech Plus, the first streaming platform devoted to innovation and technology in the built world, featuring new weekly videos from the world's leading real estate and tech professionals. The first month of streaming is absolutely free, and then you could use the code LMRE to receive 25% off your second month. To learn more, visit plus.cretech.com.
So we've spoken about obviously changes in product, and that's obviously also come down from changes in what the market, what the landlords, what your tenants are looking for. What's a big change that you have seen? And I think you probably can both answer it, but from rents to customer or Helen first-hand experience, what change have you seen from a landlord and a tenant's perspective?
I've been in this world for 4 years now, and even in that short amount of time, the expectation from our residents and from our landlords have massively increased, which is quite right. They expect a seamless, intuitive service that they can access 24/7. And for me, there are, 4 million households privately renting in England at the moment. That's grown massively over the last 20 or so years. And our mission has been to improve renting and really challenge that stereotype and the negative stereotype of renting. So as our customers want more, we've had to step up to that mark. We've got to a point now where we have really good all agents ratings, where customers are recommending us. We've invested really considerably in recruitment and getting the right property management teams in. So this kind of next step of the digitalization is critical from a customer requirement. So just like you and I want to return things on Amazon without talking to anyone at 5 in the night, our customers want to access their rent accounts and they want to make payments and they want to check up on the maintenance issue that they put in. All of those things need to be seamless, easy, intuitive. And that's absolutely the expectation. It's almost a ticket to play now rather than a USP.
Yeah. Tom, have you seen any sort of particular sort of standout changes from your clients?
I think the two big changes that have happened, and COVID has also brought together, one, you've got an overall shift towards renting from home ownership. And the fact of the matter is that renters today are going to be renting a lot longer than they used to. And I think the impact on that of the market is that the value of an individual renter, right, in a world where people rented for a short period of time until they own, there wasn't a whole lot of point or value in creating a great experience for that renter. In a world where some demographics, and lots of people talk about that trend to renting being driven by high property prices, but what's really interesting for me is actually the fastest growing demographic of renters in the US and the UK are the affluent, people who can afford to buy but are choosing not to because ownership is not really compatible with their lifestyle. Not compatible for a few reasons. One is, tying up a meaningful amount of capital in an illiquid asset that isn't appreciating at the same kind of levels that it used to for previous generations is simply not a very good investment. If you're going to live in a property for less than 6 years, the transaction costs associated with buying and selling that property just make it not a very sensible option. And the fact of the matter is we live in a world now where we're not in jobs for 30 to 40 years. We're in jobs for 3 to 4 years. And if you want to be able to maximize your value, you need to be able to move and change. And so renting really is about flexibility and convenience. And the rental process today isn't very flexible, isn't very convenient. And so that's sort of one side of it. The other side for me is that consumer expectations are moving so fast in pretty much every other segment of the wallet. We have really high expectations of service over the relatively trivial parts of our wallet, right? We expect to be able to, secure a taxi, a takeaway, or a trip away in seconds. And yet for the thing we're spending the most on and will spend the most on for the rest of our lives, that fundamental need of shelter, the safety and security of us and our families, we tolerate something lesser. And we tend to do that in every element of our wallet until there is an alternative. And the thing about consumer expectations is that they only ever go in one direction. And that's obviously both a challenge and an opportunity. And COVID has, in many areas, amplified this impact, right? Because suddenly, for the first time, landlords are starting to find downward pressure on rent, and particularly London and New York, which are our first two markets, which has meant that for the first time, folks have realized the need to invest in customer experience and how important retention and engagement with renters is. And so I think that there's a fundamental shift that has happened and is continuing.
Position yourself to thrive with a 5-week course that covers the essentials of designing, developing, marketing and operating offices in 2021 and beyond. Check out the Future-Proof Office course at realinnovationacademy.com. Quote LMRE for a 10% discount.
There's also been a massive sort of shift to businesses realizing the importance of data and clean data. Helen, I guess Touchstone is a massive business as well. Have you seen Touchstone sort of changing their approach to recording or using of data, or making sure you're using it more effectively?
Yes, and this certainly wouldn't be a property podcast if we didn't talk about data at least once. It's sort of a hot topic. Yeah, data has always been, but certainly grows more and more critical every day to us and to our clients. We know that if we properly measure, record and analyse and use it, we can make a real difference to our clients' portfolio performance, obviously following appropriate anonymisation and compliance. 2 years ago now, we recruited our first data analyst, and we've been working and have now just launched a live client reporting dashboard, so our clients can access their data at the touch of a button 24/7 and cut it and shape it as they need it. We're obviously involved in some of the more industry-wide data gathering exercises, particularly during COVID. It's always a little complex for us. It's not technically our data, it belongs to our clients. So we need to make sure that they're happy for us to share it. But with their permission, we then share that in. I think what's interesting is that certainly over the last couple of years, the definition of data has really changed. So we no longer talk about things just like tenancy length or rent levels, but we look at lessons to customer engagement. So, for example, what events have attracted the most customers so we can plan future events. And data, both property and customer related, is absolutely at the core now of our understanding of how particular assets perform, and by extension, then how we can better assess those future opportunities for our partners.
Yeah, I guess the importance of sharing it as well. That the idea of who sort of controls the data sort of varies from country to country, which is always a hot debate topic. Speaking from differences in country to country, Tom, you mentioned obviously you launched in London, you've launched in New York, two of the biggest cities in the world. What are the sort of next big plans? How do two of those markets compare?
Good question, Lisa. So the customer is the same, right? The renter is the same. The renter's expectations are the same. Perhaps Americans and New Yorkers in particular, slightly more demanding. Fundamentally, the needs are the same. You don't want renting a property to be a process that takes up a lot of time and causes a lot of angst. And you want living in that home to be delightful. So the renter experience side is pretty much identical. What's very different is the supply side. So landlords. And I think when we thought it was, and a lot of people thought we were crazy to launch a pilot in New York right at the beginning. And we did it for a couple of reasons. Number one is we are dead serious about building the world's rental brand. And to do that, you need to be thinking about, you need to be thinking globally from the outset. From my time at eBay, I'd seen how a company could get it so wrong by assuming that everywhere is exactly the same. So what we found was the renter experience, renter needs are the same, but the supply is very different. So in the UK, 80% of the market are coming from private landlords, 20% from institutional landlords. In the US, it's in reverse. It's pretty much 70% institutional, 30% private. And so we'd actually started to solve in the UK for private landlords because we thought, given that was the majority of the market, that was the sensible place to start. But we actually, from talking to institutional landlords in New York, we actually found the approach that we've ended up taking in the UK, which is to give away our platform for free to large landlords, to property managers, and soon to estate agents, and using those partners as channels for how to partner and acquire supply for the platform.
Comparing the markets again and going into a bit more detail, is there more of a hunger for adoption in the US, like just from personal experience and looking at some of our clients, their growth?
We're not expanding in the US at the moment because we feel that the product we have today is not yet a winning product in the US where it is in the UK. We've got one more part of the life cycle we need to cover before we're ready to push the US. So I can't really comment so much on that. What I can say is that there's been far greater depression of rent here in New York than there has been in London. I think it's, the approach that we're taking now is one of providing national coverage rather than city by city. I wouldn't particularly want to be a New York landlord today.
No. Well, best luck with developing the product. Helen, you obviously have been in the residential real estate space for some time, and you've obviously seen a huge amount of change. What would you say the biggest barrier to the renting and property management space is in terms of innovation, and what's maybe the biggest change you've seen?
I think there's probably two big barriers. One, which we're very much starting to overcome as an industry, which is this kind of changing the culture, moving away from the landlord-tenant, very feudal relationship to one that absolutely recognises that customers or residents choose to pay their rent and to remain within this sector. And we have to provide an experience that lives up to that. So for me, that number one, I don't think we can do anything until we've changed that culture. And I think that is really starting to change. And certainly a lot of my clients really recognise that. I think the more technical barrier is about finding systems that can work really well together. There's an increasing tendency to use a suite of systems rather than just a single all-encompassing management tool. We use LMRE as our base system, but it's really important to us that can then integrate with other providers like Residently to give us the flexibility to create a bespoke solution that works perfectly for our residents and for our landlords. So if we're going to be fleet of foot and we're going to keep up with that customer expectation, we have to create that flexibility for systems to work together.
And the final question, Tom, what's next for this partnership between you and Touchstone? Have you guys got any sort of big plans?
So effectively, we started in a pilot with a relatively small number of properties while we started to figure out and understand each other's capabilities. And we're now expanding beyond that pilot across other parts of Helen's portfolio. And I guess the key things that we've had to do is, as Helen mentioned, integrate with the other partners that Touchstone work with, which we're making pretty good progress on. Prior to our partnership, we were operating with a relatively small number of properties in London, and we're now operating with a larger number of properties across the UK.
What about Helen? What about you? Any sort of improvements or changes in the partnership or big plans you have?
Yes, I think one of the really exciting things for me will be to start to be able to measure the metrics of what we're improving through working with Residently. So looking at things like it sounds very boring, but things like our average amount of days from a customer submitting an offer through to signing a tenancy agreement. We think we can cut that time by 50% by using Residently technology. And I think some of those really measurable KPIs, I want to see those coming to the fore now. And I think over the next sort of month or 2 months, as we're rolling out across new client portfolios, we'll really start to have the kind of volume of data to see the changes we're making.
Awesome. Always goes back to the data, doesn't it? Did you know that the average cost of making a bad hire in the real estate market is £60,000? Or if you're listening to us from the US, that's $83,000. Finding out an employee is moving on is never great news, but sadly, it's unavoidable. The cost of hiring so high, it's important to get it right the first time round. So if you're struggling to find the right candidates, why not consider working with a recruitment agency? We're experts at finding the right people to fill roles. And because we already have a database to hand, we can speed up the process too. So head to LMRE.tech to brief us on your next hire. We're coming to the final part of the podcast, and it's called the LMRE part, which is one lessons learned in your career. You mention anyone or just give someone a shout out. Any regrets in your career? Tom, yours might be moving and working in ridiculous time zones. And E, what are you most excited about in the future of prop tech? Tom, why don't you go first? Is there any sort of big lessons you've learned in your career, whether it be at eBay or Residently or whenever?
I would say there are two things in particular that I think have had very positive impact. So the first one is not to underestimate the willingness of people and experts in particular to be willing to help. If you're able to reach the right person, ask them the right question, and in a way that shows that you understand their needs. I mean, we've had this a couple of times where there's been someone where we're like, wow, if we could get this person to understand and to help us with this. And yeah, I'd say it's probably happened 2 or 3 times over career. And just making the effort you'd be surprised at who's willing to help. So asking for help is underestimated. The other one for me is also, I'm a believer in karma. There have been a few times where, doing the right thing from the perspective of making an extra bit of effort for something that, is not going to benefit you comes around. Maybe it's just a way of looking optimistically at the world. But I'd say that there have probably been 4 or 5 sort of transformational moments career-wise. I'll give an example, right? This might be a better way of explaining. So my last company, Shuttle, there was one, we needed a very large multi-channel retailer to build our business off. I did a look up on LinkedIn and as I first of all established the largest multi-channel retailer in the UK is Argos. And I didn't really know much about Argos from beyond the catalogue as a child. And I look up on LinkedIn. And the guy who is the multi-channel director at Argos, literally the decision maker, was someone that I had come across very randomly, probably 5 or 6 years previously in a previous life, who had used to be an investor. We ended up going with someone else on a deal, but we kept a relationship. I introduced someone I had worked with to him. That someone ended up working at a company. That company ended up getting acquired by someone else that I'd introduced. And it just happened that this guy was in the exact position to be able to have a very meaningful impact. And our business, Argos, was the client we scaled with in the UK before we took our business to the US and before we acquired in the US. And I think there have been a handful of those, which I can trace back and I can look back and I can say, this is because of that. And ultimately it's treat people right, do the right thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And it's nice when you can actually properly reflect and work out specific moments as well and recognize it. Helen, what about you? Is there any sort of lesson that sticks out for you?
I think actually in a similar vein, one of the things I've realized as I've got a bit more experienced in the world of work is that we don't have to conform to stereotypes. So I think when I started out, I was always very professional and very formal. And actually, I've learned over the years that it's far more effective to bring your authentic self to work, even though it's not quite as perfect. You mentioned earlier kindness and leadership. For me, that's just everything. People work for people they like, they work with people they like, they buy from people they like, and people give so much more when they feel like they're trusted and valued rather than micromanaged. So from my perspective, the more we can almost just relax into our authentic selves, which sounds very Californian, give that kindness and compassion and empathy that we would give, I think the stronger we are.
Yeah, no, very good point, Helen. Definitely a good takeaway. This is the fun question. Anyone you guys would like to give a shout out to? Tom, why don't you go first?
So for me, it would be my co-founders, both at Residently and at Shuttle, because being an entrepreneur and founding a business, it's assumed that you've got what it takes, but one person never does. And for me, having amazing co-founders has been the thing that has made my life so much easier. So thank you to Steve in particular.
Oh, lovely shout out. I completely agree with that. I don't know where I'd be without my co-founders as well. Helen, what about you?
Mine's easy. My property management teams and the support teams, property management is not a glamorous business. It's a huge amount of responsibility. And it's often looking after people who are quite cross about something that's happened in their home. My guys who work in this business are rock stars, and I have every bit of kind of gratitude and respect for what they do every day. They're brilliant, and we're so lucky to have them.
Yeah, I think property management is a fairly thankless task, but you find a good property manager and you hold tight to them. Okay, what about Tom? Any regrets in your career?
No, I did used to have regrets, and I was a very naughty boy when I was at university. And I started a fake ID, which got me in a lot of trouble, and I was effectively on the run for about 5 years, and it was sort of why I had to become an entrepreneur. I was pretty much unemployable. But if you had asked me for over a 10-year period what the one thing I could have changed would be, the one regret I had would have been doing that. However, 10, 15 years later on, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had to become an entrepreneur. And so it's funny, perspective changes things and time. I don't think regrets are very healthy.
Yeah, no, I agree. What about you, Helen?
I'm the same. My mantra is very much you don't fail until you quit. It took me 5 tries to pass my driving test, but because I kept going, no one apart from all of your wonderful listeners now know that's the same in life as it is in careers. People make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But if we're humble enough to recognize those mistakes, pivot, fix them, do something else, then there's nothing to regret. I think I'm really lucky. I love my job.
Yeah. Okay, the important thing is learning from your mistakes, but we all make them every single day. I make about 1 million. Okay, the final question, guys. So, what are you both most excited about in the future of our space, about the real estate innovation world? Tom, why don't you go first?
So for me, I'm excited at the prospect of creating complete liquidity within the rental market, which I think is, the natural evolution of what happens with rising expectations and adoption of new technology. I don't think that ownership is very efficient. I'm a believer in the law of comparative advantage. And I think when we get to a place where there is liquidity and there is no friction, we end up all with a lot more time and we end up with a lot more capital, which we can deploy in parts of our lives that will have a far higher return on investment than they do today.
Helen, what about you? And is it going to be property management related? Is it going to be, maybe there's a different vertical you're interested in?
Oh, now I'm going to be very boring. It's all about property management.
Love it. Shout out.
Really passionately, we want the private rental sector to be one that people choose to live in, that they talk about being amazing, that they feel enhances their lives. And that's been our mission for the last 4 years. And what we've created and what we're creating with PropTech just puts the cherry on that cake in terms of making it a really desirable sector to live and work in. So I'm really excited about what we're doing and what we're going to go on to do in the future.
Awesome. Look, best of luck to both of you, and also for the future development of the partnership between Residently and Touchstone. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the podcast. Tom, what's the best way for people to connect with you or Residently?
Send me an email, tom@resident.ly.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Helen?
Much the same. Our website is touchstoneresi.co.uk. I'm helen.kings at touchstoneresi.co.uk, and we're also on Twitter and Instagram.
Awesome. Look, thank you guys for joining me, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you after the show. Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our guests and our sponsors, Cretech and Reentech. Make sure you visit our website, LMRE.tech, where you can subscribe to our newsletter, keep up with our industry news and events, or if you're looking for your next career move, it's all on there. The Propcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, where all good content is found. Whilst we're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate it if you could spread the word and tell a friend about it, or even write us a review. And I'll catch you next week.